Thank you, Srinivas. I hope my slides are visible
Yes,
and audible
yes,
enough.
yes.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be part of this AIOS ARC update. I'd like to thank Dr. Chitra and Srinivas for having me here. So I'm going to talk to you about retinal imaging through a general ophthalmologist lens and go through a potpourri of situations. So the three or four musketeers or pillars of retinal imaging are fundus fluorescent angiography, indocyanine green angiography, which are the invasive ones. The non-invasive ones being the ubiquitous optical coherence tomography or OCT, fundus autofluorescence. And we have a few more players coming up of late, multicolor imaging and the current range of retinal imaging, which is OCT angiography. So coming over to OCT to begin with, well, at the turn of the millennium, OCT devices came up, and it was essentially the time domain OCT which came in. We started looking at anatomy of the macula, trying to correlate it with the clinical picture. And then there was about half a dozen years where there was a glut of excellent spectral domain OCT machines coming up, and we started getting great images. And then over the last maybe 7 8 years, swept source OCT technology has come in, where we have these excellent machines from Topcon, Atlantis, and then Triton, and then Zeiss Plex Elite Plate. And we started seeing great images. And today we are seeing high definition images like this, where the macula, the 10-layered macula, shows up. It's almost optical histology. And one of the most common applications of OCT today is obviously diabetic macular edema, where commonly you see this kind of elevated appearance of the macula, the large intraretinal cysts. And on the multicolor image, which I'll be talking about in parallel, it shows up in green over the green channel, and you see the extent of that en face. And with anti-VEGF therapy, you see a progressive reduction of this macular edema. You see it settling down, and you see also that fluid settling down and giving way to exudates coming in. And you can actually see that in cross section on the OCT as well. Now, a fairly similar picture would be with BRVO, macular edemas also. But when you look at the OCT, the clue here is that very often you'll find it on one half of the OCT, as you see here. And when you look at the multicolor imaging, you can see the sclerosed vessels also. Of course, it responds very well to anti-VEGF therapy too. Cystoid macular edema is something which a lot of general ophthalmologists will encounter post-cataract surgery. And you see again this kind of a cystoid appearance, which sometimes in severe cases you have a little bit of subfoveal detachment. Again, that also responds well to treatment. So it's great to have these images coming up, aiding you alongside. So sometimes macular edema swelling may be associated with vitreomacular traction, as you can see here, and OCT really helps distinguish this, because this is the case which won't obviously respond to just pharmacotherapy, and you need vitrectomy. This is the case when you see on your 90-day examination some sort of which is funneling out, do the OCT, look for this. When you see this pattern, this is the place where you need to definitely refer to a retinal surgeon, and vitrectomy does a good job in settling this. Similarly, you may see cases of macular traction and retinal striations, and some of these will need surgery. So which ones would? So the OCT helps you diagnose or shed some light on this. Again, the first one has vitreomacular traction again, and epiretinal membrane. The other one, there's extra macular traction, there is crenation. And the third one, which looked like it had a hole in it, a macular hole, but it's actually epiretinal membrane with a pseudo hole. So the first one is the one probably you need to go in for surgery fairly quickly. Central serous chorioretinopathy is something everybody knows about. It shows up as a blister kind of appearance on the en-face, and in the clinical picture, it's serous elevation of the macula. Important to note that in acute conditions especially, you will not find, as opposed to diabetic macular edema, intraretinal cysts. You may find it only in degenerative chronic CSCRs. So obviously, once you look at the leak-borne fluorescent angiogram, and we'll be talking about that a little later, it resolves very well. Malignant hypertension is a situation where you would have a bilateral macular swelling or elevation, and it would be associated obviously with concomitant bilateral disc edema. And the interesting and important thing to note also, when you just see a patient, sometimes patients don't tell you or do not know themselves that they are hypertensive, that the macular edema here would seem to tail towards the disc or emanate from the disc. And very often there will be some level of macular elevation or subretinal fluid, and this is because of the hypertensive choroidal suffusion. So again, easily controlled with just a simple control of the blood pressure, this goes off. This kind of macular elevation tailing to the optic disc can also be seen in another rarer pathology, which is serous macular detachment and schisis secondary to optic disc pits. So when you see this kind of a schitic macular edema, very often with degeneration under the fovea, and this schisis is actually tailing into a optic disc tissue, look more closely at the optic disc and you may very often find an optic disc pit. So this is a very classical picture. This is where you need to refer it again to a retinal surgeon. And what we would do is vitrectomy and ILM peeling and gas instillation, and very often you get a very gratifying result like this. Other causes of macular schisis, which can mimic macular edema, are X-linked retinal schisis. This is one of the commonest retinal dystrophies seen in young boys. You would see on clinical picture bilateral, the classic bicycle spoke wheel pattern, and on OCT, there will be this giveaway vertical palisading pattern, schisis, which you would see, and it needs to be differentiated. Or something similar is myopic foveoschisis, also better known as myopic fractional maculopathy, which you see in pathological myopias. The cupola of the posterior staphyloма that leads to a centripetal kind of traction on the macula and causes this schisis. Now, inflammatory pathology, Dr. Vishal has already talked a lot about it. Suppose I just put up this picture where you have the case of posterior scleritis with multifocal serous RDs and PEDs. So what's interesting to note is very often here you would find, as opposed to other pathologies, a pinching of the outer retina and being attached to PEDs. And this is because of the pull of that sticky subretinal exudative tissue. And you have this almost aqueduct kind of appearance. Supplemental information, the B scan, which shows the subsequent fluid, and the angiogram with the leaks. Macular holes can be seen fairly clearly. This is a patient gentleman who had both eyes macular holes. One was chronic, the left eye was chronic and larger. Right eye was more acute. You can see the operculums at different stages. So very often people think that the edematous intraretinal spaces need to be treated with the topical steroids or NSAIDs, and I see that being referred, people going that way, but one should never do that. Just vitrectomy would resolve the situation, and as you can see in both cases, it resolved fairly well. The left eye, the eye above, I had done inverse ILM peeling and stuffed that ILM into the macular hole, and you can actually see that, make that out right there. Coming on to macular degeneration, choroidal neovascularization, the classic two types. Classic CNVM, where most of the neovascular tissue is above the line of the RP. So examples of that, the fluorescein will show you a clear, well-defined pattern. Occult CNVM's RP as such is elevated. Okay, examples. Posterior polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, or PCV, constitutes about 25 to 30% of our macular degeneration. OCT gives us great giveaway clues. You find this tall peaked, notched PEDs, hemorrhagic or pseudosanguineous PEDs, cavitation within PEDs. And sometimes you have macula presenting like this with a massive amount of submacular hemorrhage. So when you do the OCT, you will be surprised very often to see these large PEDs under that. So that is again a giveaway clue that this is PCV you're dealing with. This needs to be referred quickly. This is an urgent situation. What we would do, the several options are there for a limited case like this: TPA, tissue plasminogen activator, and intravitreal gas injection, and then follow it up with ranibizumab as we did here, and you can see that a fairly good result came through. Pachychoroid. Now, as with advances in understanding of macular pathologies, we're beginning to realize that a lot of retinal pathologies have their roots or cause in the choroid. And with advances in OCT technology, be able to image that better. And for example, sometimes, very often, PCV and AMD, both of them look quite similar. But when you look at the choroid, it gives us that separates it as chalk and cheese. The choroid in PCV is invariably thickened, whereas on in AMD, there's degeneration or thinning, and in fact, there's a term called age-related choroidal atrophy. So you look at the choroid and you can make this out too. So coming on to fluorescein angiography, the erstwhile fluorescein angiography, one of the common indications and the reason for being done is to detect macular ischemia in cases of diabetic retinopathy, especially when you have a sclerosed vessel, like in this case, or there's unexplained vision loss, and you'd like to know more. The erstwhile indications, of course, to look for new vessels and diagnose proliferative diabetic retinopathies, separated from, distinguish it from severe NPDR, as it was in the other eye. So also in cases that may be a little confusing, for example, a case like this, which looks very ischemic, but it looks like to a casual observer like a case of moderate NPDR. If you look carefully, there are these closed vessel, and that should be a giveaway clue. You do fluorescein angiography, holds the answer, and you find that there's a high-risk PDR. This is actually a featureless retina. Another case, again, to the untrained eye or casual observer, might be moderate NPDR, and you see the fluorescein, just the posterior pole looks all good. But when you look at the periphery, you find that this is indeed a case of peripheral PDR. So therefore, there is the importance of looking at the peripheral pictures and getting good peripheral images too on the fluorescein angiogram. Another case, which again, to the casual eye might be a case, might something branded as asymmetric diabetic retinopathy with obvious vitreous hemorrhage in the right eye, and the left eye looks like it might be moderate NVIDIA again. But if you look very carefully into the fluorescein angiogram, you can see that fine nuances out there. And this eye also has PDR. Disc edemas, anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, and diabetic papillopathy can look very similar. In fact, they are part of the same continuum or spectrum. It's just that AIO1 has greater morbidity, greater visual field defects, greater visual loss. RAPD is associated. Fluorescein angiography helps secure this. You see sectoral hyperperfusion with an AIO1. Diabetic papillopathy, very often just good control of the glycemic status will resolve clearly. CSCRs or central serous choroidal retinopathy, fluorescein helps you locate the leaks, like this classic example of a dramatic smokestack leak appearance. Less common, more florid in appearance, as opposed to the more common ink blot leaks. Very often, and this is a very common area where people kind of tend to misdiagnose or misrefer CSR with this subretinal fibrin. Very often people confuse this for choroiditis, but fluorescein again helps distinguish that. You see the leak there clearly, and then the subretinal fibrin tends to distort the subretinal fibrin into this kind of serpiginous kind of snake-like appearance of the leak. Vasculitis, disc leakage, capillary funning, Dr. Shahid already touched upon that. And macular neovascularization, the classic CNVM has this well-defined pattern, as you can see, so this is a great indication. The occult CNVM, the two types, type 1, the fibrovascular PD, the type 2, late leakage from unknown source. So this was more important when we were in the pre-anti-VEGF era, when PDT was important, and it was important to distinguish, classic from occult. Nowadays it's not that important, but still this can be used. Mixed CNVMs are more common. You see a large predominant classic component and minimal occult component. RAP lesions is one place where angiography is very useful. This is a rarer form of macular neovascularization, which emanates the type 3 CNV. The florid neovascular network, as you can see here beautifully, emanates from the retinal circulation. RP rips in A and D, for example, in this case of occult CNVM, happens sometimes spontaneously or post anti-VEGF treatment. You can see that it has ripped, and the scrolled up RP shows up as area of blocked fluorescence, and the denuded choroid, there is transmitted fluorescence, and fluorescein helps here. Myopic CNVMs, I think this is one area where fluorescein angiography amongst all the CNVMs really plays a role, because sometimes with the myopic tessellation, the choroidal degeneration, is difficult to make out that CNVM, and you can also have lacquer crack hemorrhages also obfuscating the picture. So FFA really helps, and it's a key diagnostic aid. It gives us a clue. Finally, for FFA, FEVR or familial exudative vitreous retinopathy is a rare pathology, but it can be confused because PAZs or peripheral avascular zones, which is the hallmark of this disease, can sometimes be seen in high myopes also. So this is a classic cases where you see the peripheral avascular zone, and sometimes you can get neovascularization also, which is an urgent indication for referral. Indocyanine green angiography, polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy is the classic indication. It comes in so many morphologies: PD, serous, hemorrhagic, submacular hemorrhages. As you can see here, with ICG, you can the branch vascular network is seen very well, and then in the later stages, you see the polyps lighting up and then washing out also subsequently. With the Heidelberg systems, you have these very combined images. You can see the FFA and the ICG together. FFA will give you the extent of the lesion, whereas ICG can pick up the polyps very well. OCT angiography, as I said, the current rage is the new thing that has come in. It's good to look at non-invasively with new vessels, can show up capillary non-perfusion, macular ischemia. And these slides, courtesy Dr. Phil Rosenthal, who has a reflex lead with him, they've shown us the components of the CNVM can also be distinguished. You can see the type 1 and the type 2 components separately. You can track their progress with treatment. You can see here type 2 the component sitting at top, the type 1 component. Can also be used to track the neovascular front of RAP lesions very well, as also in with the polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, where we are going to understand that there are tangled kinds of vessels within these polypoidal structures. Autofluorescence is
we are slightly running short of time. If we can
mapping virtually of lipofuscin, the RP and the fluorophores, the outer retina and neurosensory space. been useful for AMD, macular dystrophies, and also CSR, geographic atrophy specifically. One you can see here, there over 5 years, you can actually track the expansion of that atrophy area at the margin of lesion where there was initially excessive lipofuscin accumulation. And that excessive hyper AF is actually a sign that, this is the place where the GA, geographic atrophy, might happen or progress. RPA ribs show up as intense areas of hypoautofluorescence, just the opposite of what I showed you in fluorescein angiography, where there's transmitted fluorescence. Here it's an intense area of hypoautofluorescence. In acute phases of CSCR, sometimes the focal leak of FFA will correspond to minimal hyperautofluorescent spots. And I've actually used this to advantage, for example, in patients who have fluorescein allergies, or in a pregnant patient whom I actually treated by not doing the fluorescein angiography, but just looking at this hyperautofluorescence spot and treating that, it resolved well. Chloroquine toxicity, HCQ toxicity, we're probably going to see a lot more of that now. The different stages can be marked out beautifully with autofluorescence. Optic head drusense, classic indication, hyperautofluorescent, can be used easily, non-invasively distinguished from the case of unilateral disc edema. Best disease, the lipofuscinoid material lights up like blood, and you can see the readily formed stage very well. Stargardt's disease, again.
Anand sir, we are really running short of time. If we can just hurry up.
Hyperautofluorescence and this accumulation of lipofuscin. Cone dystrophies, you see this rod ring typically around that. And finally, in summary, retinal imaging modalities are a critical aspect of our armamentarium, and it's expanding. It helps general ophthalmologists understand and tell the patients what they're dealing with and make a focused reference. As I mentioned, OCT is ubiquitous, great for prognosticating. Fluorescein, ischemia, new vessels, CSR, great diagnostic modality. It's coming down. OCT angiography is eating into its stuff. ICG more for PCV and also for RAP, CSR, pachychoroid. Autofluorescence, when I mentioned atrophy, dystrophies, it's and RP reps. With now we have SS swept source OCT, Octa, OCT angiography, wide field imaging, which are emerging novel cutting edge areas, and we will hear more about them in times to come. Thank you.